is up, everybody? Welcome to the DNVR Lounge. I am Adam Matas. I'm joined by Brendan Vogt, Harrison Wind, and today we're going to talk about the impact of Michael Malone, Tim Connelly. They kind of share the glory in this Nuggets era, but we're going to try to talk about who deserves credit for what. And first thing I want to ask you guys, if I were to ask you Tim Connelly's style of management as an executive, what kind of things come to mind?
I think he's a player's executive. I think he really likes basketball first and foremost, almost more than the actual job itself that he has now. And he's a guy who likes to have a relationship with all the guys in the locker room. We see him, I think, fairly often. Not that I have a point of reference here, in the locker room talking to players. So just like a familial guy like that. And I think he has a relationship with the guys that he's managing.
The one thing I think of when I'm talking about Tim Connelly is patience. Tim Connelly is a patient executive. You know, how many times have there been throughout this rebuild, I'll call it, where the Nuggets could have, pushed that treadmill ahead faster? How many times could they have skipped steps? But no, they didn't skip steps. And I think a lot of that has to do with Tim Connelly's approach, his mentality, and just the long view he's always had.
I think of the draft. I mean, really, that's really where he's made his name, and he's just had a really great run of draft picks, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But same question, Michael Malone. Brendan, how would you describe his style of coaching and leadership?
I just think of defense. I mean, it's I know I don't know if that's like a style, but like defense 1, 2, and 3.
Certainly what he talks about the most.
Yeah, it matters to him, but he's also a culture setter. I think maybe some guys are tacticians. They're experts, right, from an X's and O's standpoint. Michael Malone is a leader of men in that traditional, if not antiquated, coaching sense.
I think culture setter is a great one. I also think just tactician, detail-oriented. Like Michael Malone is a taskmaster in terms of every single detail, every single day at practice, in a game, he wants to be prepared for. And I think putting in the work is also a staple of Michael Malone.
I think also discipline. I mean, I think he's a guy that's a little bit traditional, although we've seen him be flexible and I guess progressive in certain areas. But I think he's a guy that the little details matter so much, and almost more than the big picture. He's always focused on just having the discipline and organization. All right, so let's look at some of the big things here. When we compare Michael Malone and Tim Connelly, one of the things people say with Tim Connelly is, he drafted so well. Look how many players he drafted. And then when people talk about Michael Malone and his coaching staff, they developed players. Which one is it, do you think? Who deserves more credit for the fact that the Nuggets have produced so much talent over the last 5 years? Player development or great player identification of the draft?
It's so hard to know, right? Because I think a large element of Tim's job, and really any executive's job, is luck. And that's not to say he doesn't deserve credit for bringing talented guys in and guys that are willing to adhere to this culture. But it's Michael Malone who's taken guys, and we've just seen linear improvement, ego management. It gets better year after year. So it's just hard to know how much of Tim can be really credited when there's so much luck involved.
I think you can say Tim Connelly has almost done too good of a job as a general manager.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. It is true.
The fact that he has mined the draft how he has, and for the last couple of years, there have been talented players who could be getting 15, 20 minutes a game on most of the teams in the league. They can't get that in Denver. So, my opinion, Tim Connelly has done his job. He has given this coaching staff and organization all the talent they could want. He's built a championship contender without tanking, which I think is very significant. And the fact that he's done it in Denver is big too.
Yeah, and you look at some of the players that they've identified. You're also talking about the Torrey Craigs of the world, right? Tim Connelly's coaching staff. So that's, Craig at an age when he came to Denver where he was already through the development phase. He was in the NBL league out in Australia. Now the NBL league's a little bit more popular, but 3 years ago, nobody was really coming out of it. So to identify a player there, to find guys in Serbia and Spain and everywhere that they have found them, to me, I think the identification is the bigger part. So I'm going to give this one to Tim Connelly, this section here. The offense, the style, the Jokic offense. Obviously Tim Connelly discovered this guy and his coaching staff discovered him, but I don't know how many coaches would have handed the keys over to a point center. How much credit does Malone get for just embracing this Jokic style?
He gets a ton of credit, and I don't think a lot of coaches, especially a lot of young coaches, which Michael Malone was when he got to Denver, especially coaches
he's still kind of young. I mean, he's medium.
Still, and also a coach coming off a situation in Sacramento where he got fired. So, you don't know, how much of a rope he has in Denver. He obviously wants to get off to a good start his first couple of years in Denver, but to tie everything to a really unproven guy in Jokic, a second rounder who plays a style that's so new to the NBA. And the fact that Malone's a defensive guy and tying everything to Jokic, somebody who could not care a lick about defense his first couple of years in the league, he deserves a ton of credit there.
Does Malone get docked at all because he was reluctant to start Jokic that second year and benched him and, started Nurkic over him for a while?
No, I don't think so. Because Jokic, when you think about his draft position, what we saw of him notwithstanding early on, he just didn't kind of command that, right? Respect as a player, as a prospect.
I think by that point, though, his second year, it was clear he was a better player than Nurkic.
But I think Malone, like virtually anyone else on this roster, needed to see certain things checked off the list. You have to earn it with him. And there is more attention to defense now in Jokic. With each year, he seems to care a little more. And I think, he deserves credit for being patient, I think.
Yeah, I'm with Adam here. I think he gets docked a little bit, but like you said, Brendan, I can understand why he didn't go all in with Jokic immediately or after even year one, like I was saying earlier.
I think it had more to do with just the Nurkic, Jokic volunteered, and that solved a problem of
Sure.
And also you got Nurkic, a lottery pick, and you've got Jokic, a second rounder.
That's what I'm saying, really.
The Nuggets had a lot more invested in Nurkic at that point than they did with Jokic.
Who gets credit for Paul Millsap? Because Paul Millsap coming to Denver was a big move. Obviously, it changed the whole team and made them a defensive team, but who got credit for the recruitment part?
I'm going to give it to Tim Connelly, not just the recruitment, but the execution of the whole plan. They waited patiently. They knew who their guy was. They circled him, and they waited out that market. And by the time the Millsap contract was signed, they didn't really have any threats. And that was a team-friendly deal, no matter what anyone says. So I give it to Tim.
I think Tim too, barely, because Tim Connelly is the one who put the Nuggets in the position to be an attractive suitor for Millsap. He's the one that made sure they had cap room, that identified Millsap, going back to that patient approach, like I said earlier. They identified Millsap years ago as a guy they wanted to bring in. But in terms of being in the room to sell Millsap in that specific moment that he should become a Denver Nugget, I think Malone deserves a lot of credit for that too.
So Tim Connelly, I think, helped build a culture in Denver through the draft, which we'll talk about here in a second. But he brought guys in that I think guys like Millsap can appreciate and would want to play with. But I think Michael Malone, one of the traits, the underrated qualities about him is he has a lot of friends around the league. Every time Chris Paul comes in, he's talking to Coach Malone. Every time LeBron James comes in, a lot of players, DeMarcus Cousins, a lot of players around the league, I think, take notice of Denver in large part because of Malone. And the fact that he was there and helped close the deal with Millsap, to me, I give him the nod in this one, just slightly.
And the fact that both were so aligned on what they wanted to do defensively.
Right.
Yeah.
That was a big factor as well.
Now, how about this? The culture. We talk a lot about the culture around the Nuggets. Who deserves the most credit for that, Brendan?
I think it's Malone again. I really do. Especially, I think it's manifested most in this change on the defensive end, which requires huge attention to detail and mostly effort. And that stuff just doesn't follow unless those guys have completely bought into what their coach is selling. And you're hearing guys now, maybe not Murray and Jokic yet, but you're hearing a lot of guys throughout that locker room echo, we're a defense-first team. That's Malone, I think.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I like what you said about Malone, but Connolly's the guy who identified these specific players as guys who could fit into the culture he was building. Yeah. All these guys in this locker room are selfless, they're unselfish, they're hard workers, they love the game. Those were all traits that the front office identified in terms of guys they want to bring in, behind Jokic, of course. And I mean, everybody falls in line behind him in terms of his unselfishness and just how he plays the game. So
this is a lot like the draft question about was it player development or not. And yeah, they brought in guys that I think were malleable and wanted to learn and wanted to work hard and do whatever. But I do think that Malone is the one that is touching these guys on a daily level.
Definitely.
And for me, that's the bigger part of it. Yes, you brought the guys in. Yes, I think Tim Connelly has fostered sort of an environment of trust in the whole organization. They're not blindsided guys or, being overly cruel with trades or anything like that. But Mike Malone's the one that talks to these guys every single day, multiple times a day, and interacts with them. So for me, they both deserve a lot of credit. I think Malone wins this one.
But one thing about Tim Connelly, too, he's the president of basketball operations, so he sets a culture throughout the company like any other CEO would. And he's a very relaxed guy who seems to care about everyone as a person, and that's sort of permeating around this team, I think.
All right, let's talk about best moments for each guy now and just sort of what their highs were. Let's start with Tim Connelly. Harrison, in your opinion, what was his best moment or best move decision?
Well, it's got to be getting Jokic in the second round. And you can say there was a lot of luck involved in that. But, I mean, Tim Connelly had to see something in Jokic to make that draft pick. A lot of teams passed on him, but I will give an honorable mention, and maybe this was his best move in looking back on it, to trade pick 16 and 19, to trade pick 11 for 16 and 19, pretty much trade Doug McDermott for Gary Harris and Yusef Nurkic. McDermott, 20-minute per game, just a random rotation player, I think, for two borderline all-star guys. That really might be his best move.
I think we would look and talk about that move differently had the subsequent Nurkic move been a little different. He didn't ultimately flip him into anything, but you're right. That doesn't take away from the Mason Plumlee's a good player. It just wasn't a great trade. That doesn't take away from the fact, though, that Nurkic and Harris for McDermott in a vacuum, that's a steal. That's a landslide.
It is a steal, and it's funny because Harrison changed. This is a flip-flop, a live flip-flop on this show. He originally had the draft pick as the Nurkic-Harris one being more important. I think it is the Jokic pick. This one's easy. Where are the Nuggets without them hitting on the 41st pick in that draft? They're maybe a good team. Maybe we're a little high on some of the decisions, but they are nowhere near the team that they are today.
I think what I'm saying with that is there's more luck involved in getting Jokic, I think, when they did in the second round, than flipping those two lottery picks for 11 overall.
I mean, Tim's told us straight up multiple times he doesn't give himself credit for the Jokic pick. And I know he's a humble guy, but there's an element of luck there that has to be looked at.
He still did see something in them.
That's true.
He still did see something.
A lot of teams passed. All right, what about worst moment for Tim Connelly?
How about Donovan Mitchell trade, probably?
I don't know about that one. Though that one turned out to be so bad because of how good Donovan Mitchell was, but they didn't pass up Donovan Mitchell, they passed up OG Anunoby.
Well, they didn't get him because he was taken one pick ahead, and then they sort of panicked and took Leiden.
Right.
But I that's on him too.
Oh, so you're saying that whole draft?
The whole chain of events. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but they're perfect.
The trade in a vacuum, I'm following their logic.
Right.
But the execution and the honestly panic after OG was taken is inexcusable.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd say it's that whole night. You can talk about Moutier, but I mean, Moutier at 7 overall, that was viewed as a rock-solid selection when they made it. Right. So I don't know how much you can really fault the Nuggets for that. I'd say what Brendan did that draft night.
I think that's the right answer. A close second you can argue would be the Nurkic trade, and I think getting Plumlee was good. Giving up that first rounder was obviously bad, but also just, Nurkic was a good player, and it was an unfortunate situation, a buy or a sell low situation, but it did, quite frankly, in no uncertain terms, cost the Nuggets a chance to go to the playoffs that year, and then also put them in a weird spot to extend Plumlee. So that one also, I think, on the list. How about Michael Malone? What was the best move, decision, coaching moment he's had?
I think it came in a press conference.
Oh, wow.
I think it's take that L on the way out.
So the Warrior fans can come in here, the Celtic fans can come in here, Laker fans come in here, but take that L on the way out.
And Nick Kosmider just wrote about this. It's more than a thing on a T-shirt. I really do think it became sort of a battle cry for Nuggets fans and people who are glued into this era of Nuggets basketball. And that's a team that is not afraid of anyone, a team that thinks they're good enough to beat anyone.
But not just that, it's also like taking back ownership of the team. And it felt for several years the Nuggets didn't belong to Denver.
He was kicking that little brother complex out the door. This is our team, this is our building, and you're with us or you're not.
I'd probably say December 15th, the decision to put Jokic, as the starting center and move forward in that direction with that style of play. Maybe it took a little too long to get to that moment, but Malone deserves a ton of credit for, jumping in with 2 feet on the Jokic train right then when he did. So that's probably mine.
Yeah, I would probably say December 15th too, although I do think that moment, it sounds funny to say a press conference, but it was important. There is a real clear mark, 2 real clear marks, I think, in this era of Nuggets basketball. December 15th is the first one. That's the date they became who they are today, in large part, Jokic's team. But then it's also the take that L night on the way out night, which was the night to me in which the fan base or the people in Denver kind of looked at the Nuggets and said, yeah, these guys are cool. Yeah. The diehards were already there, but the casuals, I think it invited them back in. It was really clever how it invited them back into the arena.
He also vaunted himself into this like coaches we really respect and commands respect in the media huddle type of circle, which I think is a real thing. A lot of the best coaches in the league are in that circle.
What about worst moment for Michael Malone?
Maybe deciding to bring Jokic off the bench.
Yeah.
Behind Yusef
the
Nurkic.
yin and the yang. So the best and worst decisions both kind of go together.
I mean, that really just kind of delayed the eventual Jokic takeover and Denver just moving in this direction and becoming the team they are now. that really kind of delayed that process. And I mean, looking back on it, it was a pretty bizarre decision, I think, when it happened even.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that'd be mine.
I worry it will have something to do with Michael Porter Jr. when it's all said and done. I don't know if that's the case yet, so this is kind of a fake answer. I know it's a cop-out answer, but I just worry if we always talk about how he maybe mismanaged the Nurkic situation a little bit. It might be Michael Porter Jr. that supplants that moment when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I think I would throw the whole Nurkic situation in here because Nurkic is a heck of a player, and I think we all saw and got the sense that Nurkic wasn't a tough guy. Maybe he wasn't all about the team in the same way that some of the other guys were, but for whatever reason, a coach's job, you have to foster all types of relationships. And Malone tried. He flew out to Bosnia over the summer, but for whatever reason, he couldn't make it work. Ended up benching Jokic and doing some weird things with putting him at power forward that ultimately fizzled out and also might have cost the Nuggets a chance at a playoff spot that year.
One of Malone's best moves, which we should probably touch on, I think happened last season, putting Isaiah Thomas into the rotation for 9 games and then quickly taking him out when that situation could have gone awry. I felt like he handled that perfectly.
I also want to push back a little bit on the Nurkic thing. I mean, the results speak for themselves, but there is an element of what was he supposed to do? I mean, you do have to start Nikola Jokic, and some of this falls on Nurkic obviously he's responded to whatever they're doing in Portland, but he shut down in Denver.
But it does seem like that seems to be, from the outside, seems a little bit like this is one of the things with Malone. You can't lose Nurkic. You need to keep him happy, and you need to find a way, and that's part of a coach's job. Maybe it's not the most important job, but there are guys that I think towards the end of the bench that Malone has lost in large part because once you're done with him, and it ended up costing the Nuggets a little bit. All right, guys, let's wrap this up and figure out who deserves the most credit, Tim Connelly or Michael Malone. Harrison, I'll start with you.
For me, it's Connelly, and this is really close, but the NBA is a players' league. It always has been, it always will be. Tim Connelly is most responsible for getting these current players into Denver, and he's responsible for getting Nikola Jokic here. And how the Nuggets play, if they can ultimately contend for a championship, that comes down to Jokic. Connelly deserves the most credit for getting him here.
But how much of that is luck, we can't know. I'm going to give it to Michael Malone. He was given potential, but he turned it into talent and maybe title caliber talent.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think if you look at 2014 to 2018, I would say it's Tim Connelly. That's brought all the talent in, as you said. But over this last year, and I think especially going forward, Michael Malone has just done a fantastic job, and he's the one that I think everything will hinge on going forward. And even I think this last year, kind of getting him to that second round, how prepared they were throughout both series for him. So I think it's really, really close. I ultimately give it to Tim Connelly for the longevity, the overarching part of it. But I do think it's sort of switched going forward. As kind of an epilogue, let me ask you this one. Who do you think has the tougher job going forward from this point forward, Malone or Connelly?
I think it's Malone because, in my opinion, this team's a championship contender right now, and Connelly's put the correct pieces in place to get them to that point. Now it's up to Michael Malone to get this team over the top, and it's a lot tougher to go from out of the playoffs to into the playoffs to a championship.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, it's Malone.
They're contenders right now, but if they fail to build on what they did last year, they might not win a title, and if they don't, maybe you're looking at changes. What changes come? Who goes? What does that move look like? I can't fathom how hard Tim Connelly's job must be.
Yeah, it's not for both of those guys. I don't think it's anything that the next 6 months is going to determine that. Right. But certainly they're at the point where you got to start producing and always moving forward. I think Tim Connelly's job is really difficult this summer. Paul Millsap's a free agent. He's such an important part of this team. Deciding before the trade deadline which players stay, which players go, that's a real question that's going to affect this team long term. But I'm with you, Harrison. I think Michael Malone is the one who has the tougher job. He is with these guys on a day-to-day basis, and he'll be the first one to go if things were to go south for a prolonged period of time.
I guess the bar he has to clear is championship, right?
Yeah. He's under more pressure, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But ultimately, this was a fun debate. But the truth is, these two guys just so linked together, and I think a big part of their success is the fact that they've been able to collaborate over this entire rebuild and going forward, at least to this point. So you really almost can't separate the two. But if we did, I guess now we know who gets the credit. Thanks for tuning in, guys. This was part of our series on the top of the 10s, the most important things and the biggest storylines from the 2010s. I'm Adam Matas. He's Brendan Vogt. He's Harrison Wind. And we are DNVR.